The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show. I generally am against relishing other people's misfortune.
Schadenfreude.
Or Schadenfreude, yeah, or bad situations. But there's a woman who's a big Trump supporter who is a big supporter of the Mexican wall. And it turns out that because of the proximity of her home to the border, that Mexican wall would actually be putting her house in the Mexico side of the wall. In other words, the house would still be in the United States, but because of the terrain and the circumstances of where the wall would have to be built, her house would actually be boxed into Mexico, and she's not happy about this at all. And there's actually a lot of these stories about not only certain areas of the border where, because of the proximity of American homes to the border, this could happen, but also just generally issues with land that would have to be taken through, I can't believe I'm forgetting the term right now, eminent domain for the border wall. I mean, there's just all sorts of these stories. And of course, when you look at who is more likely to live in that area, a supporter of Trump or a non-supporter of Trump, it's disproportionately going to impact Trump supporters.
Right. So you're saying that because it's on the Mexican side of the border, obviously, like, they're cut off from their land, but it's still technically part of the United States. So
correct. If
Trump was to get rid of NAFTA, for example, they wouldn't have to pay any exports on their goods. So I guess in that way, they're not voting against their own interests, right?
That is digging pretty deep for some kind of silver lining here. I don't know that is how Pat Bell of Riverbend, Texas, is thinking about this. And she liked the wall. She likes Trump. She loved the build the wall stuff because I guess she thought, hey, I guess the wall might be beautiful, like Donald Trump says it would be. She'd better hope it has the door in it that Donald Trump promised, because otherwise she's going to have trouble getting back into the United States, even though she'll be on U.S. soil, but getting back into the greater United States.
Well, I think it's already happened. I mean, obviously, like, the wall isn't going to be completely done all across the border with 35 feet in height and a big, beautiful door in the middle, but there's going to be some more border patrol, some fencing, and this change has already happened to this farm.
It's estimated that it's in the thousands, the number of people who might have property taken for the wall by eminent domain. But of course, that's if the wall is going to happen. And right now, there is not really an indication that the wall as conceived by Donald Trump is going to happen. And of course, there's border fencing in different parts. We've talked about it. Certain areas have natural borders, which don't really lend themselves to the wall that Donald Trump is proposing anyway.
The Rio Grande, for example.
For example, the river, yeah. So there's a lot of questions around this. And obviously, Mexico is not going to pay for the wall. We heard from the transcripts that were released between Donald Trump and the Mexican president, excuse me, that Donald Trump asked the Mexican president not to publicly talk about the fact that they're not going to pay for the wall because it's not good for optics for Trump. And the Mexican president said, yeah, no, I'm going to make that clear because it's important that people know that we're not going to pay for the wall because we're not going to pay for the wall. So I don't even know if it will happen. Well, it's actually not even being discussed that much because of the constant scandal that the administration's under.
Yeah, and Congress doesn't want to fund it. I mean, this is a sad story in a sense, too, because this family's owned that land for over 100 years. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to see that happen, even though, you know, they voted in the wrong direction. They voted against their own interests. And in a way, it's a story that keeps reinventing itself because, you know, we were talking about the healthcare debate just a month ago, and I'm sure there were plenty of Trump supporters who finally realized that repealing Obamacare would kick themselves off of coverage.
Yeah, and there's no shortage of people who vote against their own best interest. That's not a new thing. And also there's sort of a disconnect between even understanding, oh, I supported candidate A, but actually candidate A's policies are the ones that are making life worse for me now. A lot of them will just blame candidate B anyway.
But I guess you can't really poke fun at them because if you want to win them over, the best thing to do is to show some sort of sympathy.
Of course.
Because otherwise they're just going to distance themselves from you and not want to hear it.
And speaking of sympathy and empathy, we've now learned that the mayor of Salt Lake City, Utah, Ben McAdams, actually was spending nights on the street and in homeless shelters secretly. This has now been revealed. He says it was never for attention, that he was trying to figure out what are the conditions in some of these shelters? What are the conditions for people living on the street? And he said, I didn't feel safe. He did this for 4 months and kept it a secret and went to a number of different shelters. He left work on a Friday with no money or ID. he went into one of what is considered the more troubled neighborhoods of Salt Lake City, Utah. And he spent 3 days and 2 nights walking and sleeping alone among the homeless and among those struggling with substance addiction in Salt Lake City's Rio Grande neighborhood. And it was one night on the street, one night in the shelter. And he said it was completely eye-opening. And listen, I'm not recommending every elected official do this, but the lack of sympathy and this sort of offhanded, hey, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You're only poor or homeless if you're lazy. As soon as you decide not to be homeless, you won't be homeless anymore. It would be great if more elected officials actually figured out how this all works.
And I guess at the time they were debating opening up a third homeless resource center in Salt Lake City. And, you'd have to imagine he's a Democrat, so he's going to be swinging in favor of that direction anyway.
Yeah.
But I think this really solidified his decision to approve that as well, seeing how these people live day to day.
And much of what he, quote, uncovered, and I use that term loosely because most of us who follow homelessness and drug addiction and poverty in the United States are aware of this. Part of his discoveries included that there's a lot of drug use inside he was in the men's dorms, of course, in this homeless shelter. This included his bunkmate injecting drugs and constant smoke from everything from marijuana to who knows what else in the men's dorms. Violence, many fights between, again, he's in the men's dorm, men at this homeless shelter. And we know all of this stuff, right? Because of the fights, he witnessed someone dragged off of their bunk and hitting their head on a concrete floor and suffering an injury. This is all the stuff that we know goes on, but too many people sort of say, hey, I'm just not even going to think about what it is that happens.
Certainly an eye-opening experience for him, and I guess he only was doing this for a couple of days, too. And he's a young guy. He's maybe 40, 42, something like that, so, he can handle the conditions for a couple nights. And, it's the middle of summer in Utah, so these conditions can get a lot worse for these homeless populations, and he only saw a little bit of that.
That's right. I mean, one of the big issues with homeless populations in the U.S. is when it gets really cold. When I lived in New York City, that was a major issue. Here in Boston, given how cold it gets in the winter, it's also a major issue. And certainly Salt Lake City in the summer, more likely to have problems from heat than cold in the summer. But obviously in the winter, it can get extremely cold. And of course, there are people saying it's a publicity stunt.
Because at the time he didn't want to publicize it, but now he is, so I can see how he can kind of make that charge.
The thing is, at some point, let's take him at his word that he wanted to just learn what the conditions were. If at some point you want to be able to be seen as more credible on these issues, you sort of have to say that you did this, right? Because if you never reveal that you did this, you would seem like you're sort of talking out of turn and out of ignorance. And he's making he sort of has to say, hey, I did do this in order to be seen as, oh, wow, he actually does know what it is that's going on in these shelters.
And he was on the right side of this issue the whole time, it seems. It's not like he's one of these Republicans who actually, when they try something out, decide to flip 180 completely, like that radio host Mancow, who was all for torture and waterboarding, and then he had it done to himself. And
he said that's
he
definitely
quit in like
torture.
4 seconds.
We shouldn't do that. I remember Mancow Muller from Chicago radio.
Or that guy, John Stossel, who like dressed up as a homeless person and panhandled and raised like $80, and he was, glib enough to say, well, $80 for the course of a day, that adds up to like $30,000 a year tax free. This is a great living they're doing.
He didn't really learn too much from that experience, did he?
No.
Okay, Fox News has suspended host Eric Bolling, or Bowling. How is it pronounced?
I think it's Bowling.
Bowling, Eric Bowling.
He learned a lot too, for another good transition.
Yes, he did. And he is a longtime host on Fox News. Currently, he's a host on The Five, right? I believe.
No, I think he has a new show now.
His own show?
Well, not anymore.
Maybe not. Okay. So he's been suspended from Fox News because there's an investigation being done into lewd photographs and messages that he sent to 3 female colleagues at Fox News. Fox News learned about this after Huffington Post did an inquiry. And there was an article published on Friday night to Huffington Post that cited a dozen anonymous sources who said that he was sending unsolicited pictures of male genitalia, presumably his own.
I would imagine.
Although we haven't independently confirmed that, and I don't plan to independently confirm that. He was sending these via text messages to 2 colleagues at Fox Business and 1 colleague at Fox News. And it said that the messages were sent several years ago and on separate occasions. Bowling's lawyer didn't immediately return a request for comment, but said to the Huffington Post that he recalls no such inappropriate communications, doesn't believe he sent such communications, and will vigorously pursue legal remedies for any false and defamatory accusations that have been made. It's just not surprising.
No,
right?
Because he's a man who works at Fox News. I mean, this is the story that keeps coming back. We have Roger Ailes, Bill O'Reilly. Both of those cases were sexual harassment.
Yeah.
I don't know if this kind of qualifies because I don't think these women wanted to receive these pictures. Obviously, there's nothing illegal about sending them as long as they're of age and all that stuff. But they don't want to see that stuff.
Like with the Google story, we're talking about a company that as long as they're not violating employment non-discrimination law, they can say, we do not believe that this person is a good fit for the corporate culture of our organization. And as long as there's no evidence that that's a decision made on the basis of nationality or sexual orientation, depending on what state you're in, or religion or race or whatever the case may be, then they can do that the same way that Google can get rid of the engineer that they got rid of.
It's also such a weird thing to get yourself off on, you know, like I guess I can understand a guy sending that to a woman he's romantically interested in, even though I don't see why she would want that.
Well, the idea would be, I guess, if the individual believes that this might help in their courtship of the other person, then they'd say, oh, I'm going to send these pictures. The other person will be so impressed that then they'll be unable to resist me.
But isn't it common sense to keep that stuff out of the workplace?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, out of the workplace, this was presumably done using a private device.
But to co-hosts.
I know. But that's the thing.
Who also work there.
If you're pursuing someone that you're working with, then that's, even if you're using a private device, you're doing it off business hours. I don't know. It's a very gray area when it comes to the appropriateness of at-work relationships. And we talk about power dynamics when it's a supervisor and supervisee sort of situation. Long story short, another one may be biting the dust. Do we know whether Bowling will be coming back at all?
He's recently suspended for now. We'll have to see.
He signed a long-term contract not that long ago. Sometimes these suspensions are sort of interim to eventual firings or forced resignations. We don't know.
When I saw the story, I thought that I should look up Eric Bowling's comments on the Anthony Weiner scandals because that's going to be, you know, great for Republican hypocrisy. You're going to see plenty of that.
Sure.
And he called Weiner a sick human being to continue doing it time and time again after getting caught, which Bowling hasn't continued to do yet. So I don't know if it's completely hypocritical.
Well, he did this with multiple women. So I guess in that sense, he did it once and then again, but presumably not after getting caught. Weiner got caught and then did it again.
And you should see his lawyer's response to all of this. I don't recall. I don't remember. It's typical legalese stuff. I do understand using that from a legal perspective because it is really difficult to prove that someone remembers something unless they end up getting cell phone records from like 2 weeks before where he was texting about, remember when I did this thing several years ago or whatever. But generally speaking, it's hard to prove definitively that someone does remember something they claim not to. But even as someone like me who's not a lawyer, I see that and I just think, oh my God, he definitely did it.
Yeah.
Because if he didn't, I think he would just outwardly say directly, I didn't do any of this. I decline and deny all of these allegations against me.
We will, well, he kind of is saying that.
No, he says, I don't remember.
But they also said, there was some other part where he said some other thing, or the lawyer said something like he doesn't remember and doesn't believe that he did this or something like that.
Well, you don't believe?
It's legally ambiguous. I get what you're saying, but it's sort of all you can really expect from an attorney when they're representing someone who probably did do the stuff that they're accused of having done. All right, we'll see if Eric Bowling, maybe by the time we get back from vacation, Bowling will be fired.
Yeah, I would call that the Bowling Green Massacre.
That would actually be the Bowling Green Massacre, yeah. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks for watching the bonus show. Welcome to all of our new members, of course.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.